Elias stepped off the shuttle into the grand chamber of the floating palace and immediately wished he'd paid more attention to the etiquette guide. The floor was made of translucent panels that hovered a meter above a swirling plasma of light, and he had the uncanny sensation that one wrong step would either trigger an alarm or launch him into orbit. His boots squeaked slightly as he adjusted his grip on the satchel containing his personal tools, which already felt absurdly small compared to the levitating instruments and crystalline scaffolding around him. Ahead, the queen sat upon a dais that seemed to float independently of the palace's gravity field. Ceralia's presence was both serene and commanding. She looked almost human, the smooth planes of her face and the silver hair that shimmered in the ambient light giving the impression of timeless elegance. But her ears, her long, sweeping ears stretched above her head, moving subtly to catch every whisper and murmur, twitching with a life of their own. They betrayed a constant awareness, a predator's intuition softened by grace. Elias had to remind himself not to stare, but the human curiosity lodged firmly in his chest. A junior attendant stepped forward to guide him, but Elias tripped over his own pacing, nearly bumping into a hovering ink orb used for ceremonial record-keeping. The orb spun harmlessly, leaving a streak of iridescent ink on the air before righting itself. "I assure you," he said quickly, "I meant no offense. I'm new to floating objects, apparently." The attendants blinked, some suppressing small smiles, and even Ceralia's eyes flicked with what might have been amusement, though her ears remained alert. "Human," her voice flowed smoothly, harmonics subtly altered by the palace's translation array, "you may approach the weapon." Her ears twitched, long and deliberate. "It has waited centuries for one capable of understanding it." Elias nodded, trying to convey both respect and calm competence. "I'm honored," he said, though his pulse insisted on conveying something closer to panic. He moved toward the weapon, suspended in a crystalline field that seemed to shimmer in acknowledgement of centuries of failure. The ceremonial blade was fractured in multiple places, yet its energy conduits hummed faintly, as though it remembered the power it once held. The metal gleamed with a strange iridescence, the color shifting subtly depending on the angle of light. He knelt before it and instinctively began scanning, trying not to think of all the previous artisans who had failed. Holographic schematics hovered beside him, ancient symbols interlacing with modern analytical readouts. "So," he muttered to himself, "it's broken, legendary, and probably cursed. Perfect." He smiled wryly. "I always work best under pressure and panic." Ceralia observed silently, her long ears angled toward him, twitching occasionally as if weighing his every move. "You may touch it," she said, "but do not assume understanding comes from strength or haste. It is subtle, and subtlety has outlasted those who tried to wield it." Elias reached out, gingerly tracing the weapon's fractured edge with his fingers. Energy pulses ran faintly through the cracks, almost like a heartbeat. He paused, looking at the fine lines in the metal, and then at the intricate glyphs that ran along its core. "These aren't just cracks," he said aloud. "They're intentional stress markers, built in to preserve the story of failure." "You are perceptive," Ceralia said. Her tone suggested curiosity rather than praise, a rare distinction in this court. "Most see only the brokenness, not its reason." He chuckled. "Well, humans have a habit of missing the obvious until it hits them in the face. I can already feel centuries of engineers glaring at me." He tapped a scanner to read energy flows, accidentally setting off a harmless spark that arched in the air, narrowly missing a floating banner. The court attendants jumped. Elias waved his hands apologetically. "It's a feature, not a bug." "Mostly." Ceralia's long ears twitched once, a gesture Elias decided must mean amusement. "Do not assume failure diminishes courage. The weapon will test you, and you must answer with your mind, not your hands alone." Elias nodded, adjusting his satchel, whispering, "My mind has never been this nervous, but I think it's ready." He examined the metal further, running simulations in his head, thinking of harmonic resonance and stress redistribution, of the centuries-old materials he had never encountered before. Maybe the reason no one fixed it before, he muttered, is because they never asked it politely. Politeness is sometimes the strongest tool, Aurelian replied. Her ears lifted higher, subtly shifting, as if to frame him in a question rather than an observation. Elias felt a strange warmth at her acknowledgement. He smiled faintly to himself, half with fear and half with exhilaration. Well, Queen, let's see if human curiosity and foolishness can do what centuries of expertise couldn't. He lifted the first fractured segment, carefully aligning it with the energy conduits, and whispered under his breath, "Please, don't explode." A soft hum responded, almost as if the weapon had recognized intent rather than skill. His pulse quickened, not in fear, but in that peculiar thrill of understanding something extraordinary, something considered impossible. The attendants leaned forward, holding their collective breath, and even Aurelian's long ears were still now, a sign of absolute attention. Elias adjusted a delicate crystal interface, realizing that some components had never been intended for repair, only for ceremony, and that the key lay not in brute force, but in respect and patience. Of course, he muttered, they didn't break it, they designed it to survive failure. A small laugh escaped him, nervously light. I think I'm about to make history or create a minor disaster. Aurelian inclined her head slightly, her eyes fixed on him, her ears arching elegantly toward the hovering sparks. History is always born from those willing to see differently, she said. Elias took a breath, carefully aligning the next segment of the weapon. Then let's do it differently, shall we? And in the silence that followed, broken only by the faint hum of energy and the soft crackle of the weapon awakening to attention, Elias began the impossible. Elias woke to the soft hum of the palace's energy grids, a sound that felt like the station itself was sighing. The ceremonial weapon lay on the maintenance table before him, its fractured segments aligned but untested. He rubbed his eyes and muttered, I should have requested a coffee replicator before attempting legendary repairs. The joke fell flat, except for the faint twitch of Aurelian's long ears from across the room. That tiny movement made him grin. You speak as though this is trivial, she said. Her voice carried the same calm precision as yesterday, but the subtle amusement made it almost teasing. Elias swallowed. I was trying to reduce tension. Reducing tension is commendable, she replied, though the weapon may not share your sense of humor. He crouched closer to the energy conduits, tapping his scanner lightly. I've been thinking, he said, maybe I'm overcomplicating it. Humans have a habit of ignoring tradition until it gives us a hint. Maybe it's trying to tell us something simple. Her ears flicked, a motion so slight he almost missed it. What hint? Not everything sacred is also fragile. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone to notice the pattern. He traced a subtle groove along the weapon's core, watching as energy flowed unevenly through it. If I shift the harmonics slightly, I think the conduit will accept realignment without breaking the ceremonial balance. You propose to adjust the structure itself, Aurelian said, her tone careful. Most artisans would consider that heresy. And most artisans also failed spectacularly, he said, raising an eyebrow. I figure I can offend tradition in private. He glanced at her, hoping she wouldn't scold him. Her ears twitched once. He chose to interpret that as permission. He aligned a conductive crystal with the fractured metal, his hands steady despite the centuries of failed attempts recorded in the court annals. Sparks flickered softly, harmless but startling enough that a nearby drone emitted a brief alarm chirp. Well, Elias muttered, that's tradition, I suppose. You are bold, Aurelian observed, and careless in a human manner that is strangely effective. He paused. I'll take that as a compliment. She studied him silently for a moment, then said, Your approach is unlike any we have seen. You treat the weapon as a puzzle rather than a relic. That is refreshing. Her ears tilted forward, sharp and attentive, as though leaning toward him for a better understanding of his methods. "Thank you," he said, smiling. "Though if it explodes, I might regret the compliment." They worked together in an unusual rhythm. He adjusted, she observed, her eyes following every pulse and vibration, her ears twitching to catch subtle changes in resonance. The palace was quiet except for the hum of energy conduits and the occasional chirp from hovering instruments. Every so often, Elias cracked a small joke about the weapon's stubbornness, and her ears would flick in a movement that felt like a smile. Hours passed. He had discovered patterns hidden in the ceremonial engravings, channels intentionally misaligned to preserve a story rather than prevent function. "They encoded history into the fractures," he said quietly. "Every crack, every spark tells a lesson about loss and courage." Saralia tilted her head slightly, her long ears sweeping back and then forward. "Few have perceived the purpose beyond preservation. You see meaning without assuming authority over it." "Or I'm lucky," Elias said. "Mostly it's luck, some curiosity, and probably a hint of insanity." He chuckled at the thought, brushing a fingertip along a delicate conduit. "And maybe the universe is tired of all the failed engineers, and decided to let a human try once." She said nothing, but the slight lift of her ears betrayed amusement. The first alignment test was ready. Elias adjusted a tiny harmonic calibrator, holding his breath as energy began flowing through the weapon in a controlled pattern. He muttered, "Please behave like centuries of expectation aren't resting on this one attempt." A soft glow ran along the fractures, faint at first, then growing brighter as the harmonics balanced. A small surge sent the nearest floating ink orb spinning. Elias ducked instinctively. "Oops. Minor theatrical effect," he said with a sheepish grin. "All part of the human repair protocol." Saralia's ears twitched sharply, her expression unreadable. "You are reckless," she said softly, "yet it appears effective." He exhaled, brushing a loose strand of hair from his eyes. "Reckless or creatively adaptive depends on which historian writes the story." The energy flowed evenly now, the hum of the weapon steady. And for the first time, Elias felt that centuries of failure were not a curse, but a challenge meant to be approached with humility and ingenuity. He stepped back, allowing Saralia to examine his adjustments. Her eyes studied the weapon, then him. "You honor its history," she said, "not by restraint alone, but by understanding its story and respecting its purpose." "Or I just got lucky again," he said, waving his hands. Her ears flicked upward once again, amusement and perhaps acknowledgement. "Luck is the companion of the prepared mind." He laughed quietly. "Prepared mind, reckless hands, and a touch of human charm. That should do it right." "Perhaps," she said, "perhaps it will suffice to convince others of your competence." He glanced at the hovering drones and floating attendants, all observing silently. "Well then," he said, "let's give them a show they'll remember without, hopefully, injuring anyone or triggering centuries-old curses." She allowed herself a small smile, her long ears arching gracefully. "You may proceed, human. Begin the next phase of the impossible." And as Elias carefully initiated the harmonic realignment, he felt the weight of centuries lift slightly, replaced with a strange thrill. This was not just engineering. This was history in motion, and he was in the middle of it, fumbling, joking, and marveling all at once. The next day, Elias returned to the palace workshop with a mix of anticipation and mild terror. The weapon lay on its support cradle, humming faintly, as if testing his presence before allowing him to interfere. He crouched beside it, adjusting the harmonic calibrator once more, muttering, "All right, old friend, today we finish this without incident. Or at least without too much collateral embarrassment." Saralia appeared silently behind him, her long ears flicking with subtle amusement. "You joke as if the weapon will listen," she said, the corners of her mouth lifting ever so slightly. "Do not underestimate its expectations." Elias grinned. "Expectations are my specialty. Humans fail spectacularly, but we look good doing it." "You are not failing yet," she replied, her ears tilting thoughtfully. Only navigating unfamiliar terrain. He tapped a sensor along the weapon's fracture lines. The readings were irregular, some energy nodes underactive, others dangerously overcharged. Of course, he said. Why would centuries of attempted repair leave the simplest part aligned? He shook his head. Nothing is simple when history gets involved. Aurelian crouched beside him for a moment, her long ears sweeping the ambient light. You approach this differently from our engineers. You observe, question, experiment. Not everyone respects the lessons the weapon carries. Mostly I just hope the sparks don't burn me, he said, letting a nervous laugh escape. A small arc of energy jumped from the nearest conduit, and he ducked under the harmless flash. There, proof I survive. You are oddly resilient, she said, and oddly human. Hours passed in a delicate rhythm of adjustment and observation. Elias aligned the energy conduits, calibrated harmonic nodes, and even reconfigured a few ceremonial filaments with utmost caution. Each time a spark jumped, he muttered a quick apology as if the weapon itself had feelings. Sorry, centuries of tradition, I mean no disrespect, just a minor adjustment. Aurelian watched silently, occasionally tilting her head, the movement of her ears betraying her engagement and amusement. The court attendants hovered nearby, some curious, some scandalized by his casual approach. One young apprentice whispered, "Does he even understand what he's doing?" Another replied, "I don't think anyone ever did until now." Elias paused, fingers hovering over the final alignment port. "You know, it's funny," he said quietly, "how all these generations assumed brute force and precision alone would fix it. Sometimes it just takes noticing what they never intended to notice." Her ears twitched sharply. "Do you realize what that implies about your contribution? I think it implies I get the fun job, and the court gets to blame me if it explodes." "You jest," she said, though the upward tilt of her lips suggested she found it amusing. He activated the final harmonic flow. Light pulsed along the fracture lines, faint at first, then brightening as the conduits accepted the realignment. A small surge lifted a hovering control panel slightly, causing it to wobble before stabilizing. Elias waved at it. "Okay, panel, I see you're alive. Good, very good." Aurelian's ears twitched once, higher this time, a signal of her approval though subtle. "You treat the weapon with respect," she said. "And yet you do not bow before its history. That balance is rare." "Respect," he said, "and minor panic, that's my formula." They continued, aligning, adjusting, watching the faint hum grow steadier, more uniform. The palace workshop seemed to hold its breath as Elias traced energy conduits with delicate fingers, calibrating them to the frequency encoded centuries ago. Every movement felt measured, deliberate, and yet infused with a natural human instinct for improvisation. "Curious," Elias said, stepping back slightly. "I think the weapon actually responds better when treated like a collaborator instead of an object of worship." "You are correct," Aurelian replied. "Most treat it as a relic or a challenge. You treat it as both history and living intelligence." At last, a faint vibration ran along the weapon. A soft, harmonic resonance filled the workshop, gentle and satisfying. Elias looked at the glowing lines of energy, his hands slightly trembling from both excitement and relief. "Well," he said, "that was terrifying, exhilarating, and a little ridiculous. In short, human engineering in a nutshell." "You are extraordinary," Aurelian said quietly, leaning slightly closer. Her long ears curved forward, catching. The workshop was silent for a moment except for the weapon's steady hum. Elias wiped sweat from his brow. "So, we're not just fixing a relic. We're rewriting a history lesson with a little human improvisation." "Yes," she said, her long ears folding gently backward, "and proving that understanding and respect can surpass fear and protocol." Elias glanced at her, catching the soft twinkle in her eyes. "All right, then. Shall we see if it holds?" She inclined her head. "Proceed." He activated the final sequence, and the weapon came alive, humming smoothly, energy flowing perfectly along its once fractured lines. For the first time in centuries, it was whole. The court erupted quietly in shocked murmurs, and Elias whispered to himself, "I may have actually done it." Ceralia's long ears lifted in a subtle salute. "You have done more than repair a weapon," she said softly. "You have shown a way to bridge history and innovation, fear and courage." He smiled nervously. "And I didn't even break anything, mostly." She inclined her head, amusement flickering in her gaze. "Mostly." Elias allowed himself a moment to laugh, the tension finally giving way. In the middle of impossibility, sparks, and centuries of expectation, he had found a rhythm, and it was as thrilling as it was terrifying. The weapon rested before them, complete, humming with life, and somewhere in its glow, Elias thought he caught the faintest flicker of approval. Elias stared at the restored weapon, unable to stop the grin spreading across his face. It sat on the support cradle, humming faintly as if content with its new alignment. "Well," he said, "I guess history can still be flexible when you bribe it with curiosity and mild panic." Ceralia's long ears tilted forward in what he decided must be her version of a smile. "You speak casually of feats few dare to attempt," she said. "Do not mistake humor for disrespect." "Right," he said, straightening. "Humor is my survival mechanism. Works for me, occasionally works for the universe." The Queen studied him closely, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the weapon. "Your work has stirred more than admiration," she said quietly. "It has challenged tradition without dishonoring it. That is unusual." "I call it improvisation," Elias said, "and maybe a touch of human audacity. Works every time eventually." "Sometimes," she allowed, a faint glimmer of amusement in her voice. Her ears lifted slightly, catching the hum of the weapon as though listening for its approval. He glanced around the workshop. The court engineers hovered, faces a mixture of awe and confusion. One of them muttered, "I didn't think it could be done without sacrificing at least 3 protocols and a ceremonial drone." Elias chuckled, "Apparently not. Who knew humans had the subtle touch?" Ceralia's lips curved in a slight smile. "You have shown that understanding, creativity, and respect can achieve what force cannot. That is rare." He shrugged. "Or maybe the weapon just like someone who doesn't overthink it. It's a bit picky that way." "Perhaps," she said. Her ears twitched as she leaned closer to examine the alignment. "You see not just the mechanism but the intent behind it. Few have achieved that." "Intent, curiosity, and mild terror," Elias said. "That seems to be my toolkit." She regarded him silently for a moment. "You have earned more than recognition. You have earned trust." He swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. "Trust, that sounds heavy." "Yes," she admitted, "and yet necessary." Elias glanced at the weapon, now perfectly aligned, its energy conduits flowing smoothly. "I guess I can manage that," he said, half to himself. "I've handled worse." "Worse?" she asked, a faint teasing lilt in her tone. "Oh, you know," he said with a grin. "Floating hallways, angry orbital drones, centuries of disappointed artisans staring at me from history logs. Minor inconveniences." She let out a soft, almost imperceptible laugh. "Your humor is persistent, human. Even in tension you find levity." "And you," he replied, "are surprisingly tolerant of it." The weapon pulsed once, a steady glow that seemed to resonate with the rhythm of the palace itself. Elias held his breath. "It's happy," he said. "I think it likes me, or at least my method." Ceralia inclined her head. "It responds to respect as much as skill. You have both." Elias stepped closer, brushing a fingertip along the energy conduit. "You know, most of this palace would have tried to fix it by brute force or ritual. Sometimes a different approach is all it takes." Her ears twitched in thought. "You demonstrate that ingenuity, tempered by understanding, can achieve what tradition alone cannot. That is a lesson beyond the weapon." "I'll take it," he said, smiling. "Call it bonus history credit." The court engineers exchanged glances. One whispered, "He's unpredictable but effective." "Unpredictable," Elias said, glancing at them with a grin. I prefer creative, makes the sparks more interesting. Ceralia's eyes softened. You honor the past without being confined by it. That is rare, that is valuable. Elias nodded. Valuable and occasionally terrifying. Terrifying? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Only because I care, he said, a hint of seriousness under the humor. If I didn't care, it would have exploded by now. Her ears lifted fully, a sign of engagement. You do care, she said. And that is apparent in every adjustment, every hesitation, every small joke you make. He chuckled. Well, if I can't laugh at myself, the energy surges will do it for me. They worked together for hours, testing the weapon, observing its energy patterns, and fine-tuning its harmonic resonance. Every adjustment was measured, deliberate, yet approached with a playful ease that surprised even the most stoic attendants. Finally, Elias stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. All right, he said. I think we're done here. The weapon is alive, the court is astonished, and nobody got fried. Win-win. Ceralia's long ears twitched upward. You have done more than restore a weapon, she said. You have bridged ingenuity with tradition, humor with reverence, and human insight with alien heritage. I call it a team effort, Elias said, grinning. Mostly human, occasionally Queen-approved. She inclined her head, amusement and respect mingling in her gaze. Your presence will not be forgotten here, human. That much is certain. Elias glanced at the restored weapon, then at Ceralia, her long ears relaxed now in quiet satisfaction. Well, he said, if history doesn't explode, maybe I'll even get a medal, or at least a good story. Her lips curved slightly. You have earned both, and perhaps something more important than either. Elias laughed softly. I'll take it, as long as it doesn't involve more sparks. I think I've had enough excitement for one generation. Ceralia's ears tilted forward as if acknowledging the humor. Very well, but the next challenge will arrive and you will be ready. Challenge accepted, he said, grinning. With caution, curiosity, and a little human flair. And for the first time, the floating palace seemed almost welcoming. Its energy hummed steady and approving, as if it had accepted not just the repair, but the human who dared approach the impossible with both wit and respect. Elias stood beside the restored weapon, letting the hum of its energy wash over him like a living heartbeat. The palace was quieter than usual. Even the hovering instrument seemed to pause, attentive to the moment. He flexed his fingers, still tingling from hours of delicate alignment, and whispered, Well, centuries of failure finally met a human stubborn enough to care. Ceralia appeared at his side, her long ears arching gracefully as she studied him. You have done more than repair a weapon, she said. You have restored purpose, honor, and insight where none thought it possible. I restored a weapon, he said, grinning. The purpose and honor, I'll let history take the credit. I'm just the guy who didn't blow anything up. You underestimate yourself, she replied, a faint glimmer of amusement in her voice. The court will not forget what you have accomplished, nor will I. He laughed softly, scratching the back of his neck. I guess that makes two things I didn't expect to survive this palace, me and my ego. Your ego, she said, is tempered by humility. That is what made this possible. They walked together toward the central dais, the weapon humming in quiet rhythm behind them. Elias noticed the engineers and attendants watching, expressions shifting from skepticism to awe. One of the older artisans muttered, I have lived decades witnessing impossible tasks fail, and now this human succeeds where we could not. I'll take it as a compliment, Elias said, and I'll try not to trip on the plasma panels on my way to glory. Ceralia's ears flicked upward, a subtle movement that made him feel as though she were smiling. Your humor is unexpectedly persistent, even in the presence of accomplishment, she said. Perhaps it is part of your skill. Skill, panic management, and occasional luck, he replied. Mostly luck. They approached the weapon together, and Ceralia gestured for him to touch the final alignment port. He hesitated, then placed his hand lightly against it. Energy pulsed through his palm, steady and warm, and he felt a connection, not just to the mechanism but to the centuries of history it carried. "You have learned to listen," Aurelian said softly, "to observe, to respect, and to act. That is rarer than any weapon, rarer than any technology in this court." "Listen, observe, respect. Got it," Elias said, nodding. "And if I fail spectacularly again, I can blame tradition." He grinned, earning a faint twitch of amusement in her long ears. "Your journey does not end with repair," she said. "It continues as understanding and stewardship. You have changed the court by your actions, but you have also changed yourself." "I hope so," he admitted. "I came here thinking it would be a simple task: fix something broken, follow instructions, survive court protocol. Instead, I learned patience, humility, and how to make sparks dance without causing panic." She nodded, her long ears folding back slightly in quiet approval. "And you have earned trust, not through rank or force, but through insight, courage, and the willingness to see differently." Elias chuckled. "Trust sounds heavier than a few sparks in a repaired weapon, but I'll carry it." The court murmured in approval, subtle but unmistakable. Even the youngest apprentice smiled, eyes wide at the human who had dared the impossible. Elias looked at them, realizing that in his humor, persistence, and willingness to engage with a world so different from his own, he had built bridges that no protocol could enforce. Aurelian gestured toward the balcony overlooking the city-lighted domes of the palace. "The weapon is complete. The court acknowledges your success, and I acknowledge your understanding." "I think I can live with that," he said. "Better than medals, honestly. Less awkward speeches, fewer floating drones swatting at me." Her ears twitched in what he interpreted as approval. "You have earned more than recognition," she said. "You have earned partnership, of ideas, of respect, and of shared responsibility. That is the greatest reward of all." Elias smiled, feeling a lightness he hadn't known when he first stumbled into the palace, terrified of floating floors and centuries of failed attempts. "I'll take it. Ideas, respect, and shared responsibility. All sounds manageable." She inclined her head. "And so history moves forward, not by tradition alone, but by those willing to honor it while daring to act." "I guess that's me," he said, grinning. "The stubborn human who almost tripped on plasma panels and accidentally became part of history." Her lips curved, subtle but genuine. "Do not underestimate yourself, Elias. You are remembered for what you have given, and for the insight you carry forward." He glanced at the weapon, glowing steady and alive, and then back at her. "Well," he said, "if the palace survives the next few centuries, it'll know I at least tried to be useful." "You were more than useful," she said. "You were remarkable." He laughed softly, feeling a warmth of accomplishment and relief. "Remarkable and mildly terrifying, but I'll take it." The hum of the weapon pulsed in quiet harmony with the palace, a steady reminder of the impossible task completed, the bridges built, and the respect earned. Elias felt a shift in himself, a confidence tempered by humility, a humor tempered by insight. He realized he was no longer merely a visitor in this alien court. He was a participant, a contributor, a human whose courage and curiosity had rewritten history in a small but enduring way. And as the palace lights shimmered in gentle acknowledgement and Aurelian's long ears rested in quiet satisfaction, Elias allowed himself a full, unguarded smile. He had come seeking a challenge, and he had found something far greater.